All right. Good morning. My name is Marshi Smith. I'm a former Pac-10 and NCAA champion in the 100 backstroke, way back in 2005. That was a good day. Just a brief background as to what kind of launched me up here. I was asked by a teammate to write a collaborative letter on behalf of the University of Arizona swim team alumni for members of the team over generations to sign in protest of the guidelines that allowed a male So we have deliberately chosen these dates for this inaugural Icons Women's Sports Conference very deliberately. And we chose these dates because they coincide with the NACDA annual convention, which is the National Association of Collegiate Directors of Athletics. There are over 2,000 plus athletic department staff from every university across the country here just down the street at the Mandalay Bay over these dates as well. There are 4 components to our conference, the number one and most important being that we are launching a new organization to serve women, to promote respect, fair treatment, and fair competition for our women and girls. Involved in that is finding a way to make our voices heard. On Saturday afternoon, we had shifts of dozens of volunteers inside the airport baggage claim at the Las Vegas airport, holding up banners welcoming NACDA as they arrived for their meeting. We greeted over 250 athletic department staff in the airport, and we gave them invitations to our conference, let them know who we were, our website, and also to come and see us at an exhibition booth inside of their meeting, where Icons will be represented with 3 stellar, star, iconic athletes for the athletic department staff to directly meet and talk to inside their own meeting in order for us to give them access to us and vice versa. The last component is this. It's a 2.5 day sports conference where we're all meeting over the course of the next couple days to hear from experts in science, law, policy, and again, some of the most incredible athletes, women athletes in history. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to someone you may have seen in the news a lot recently.
When you say you might have seen me in the news, that could be a good thing or bad thing. But I just want to thank everyone for being here. It's so nice to finally put some names with some faces and to just be banded with all of you. So far, it's kind of been like everyone kind of doing their own personal thing, so for us all to be here fighting for the same thing is just really incredible. And I also want to thank Kim and Marshi for setting this up, because I don't think people realize how much work has gone into this, and so I think we should all... What you guys have done is incredible, and I can probably speak for everyone when I say thank you. But yes, my name is Riley Gaines. Like I said, I just want to thank you guys for providing me with this opportunity to speak for myself and all the athletes who have felt silenced amidst facing unfair competition and the rule makers that have really disregarded women. A SEC record holder, a 12-time NCAA All-American, and a 2-time Olympic trials qualifier. But all that to say, being successful at such an elite level is far from easy and a lifelong commitment. It's really hard to put into words the amount of work and sacrifices that it takes to compete at this level, but I'm going to try. I started swimming at the age of 4. My summer league coach encouraged me to start doing year-round when I was 8, so this meant that in 2nd grade I was swimming about 5 to 6 days a week for 2 hours at a time, and it only got worse from there. I say worse, harder, sorry. So by the time I got to middle school, I was waking up at 4:45 to swim before school every morning because just one practice wasn't enough. I missed out on family vacations and sleepovers with friends. I trained all summer over Christmas break. I traveled for national level meets, causing me to miss school and proms and spring breaks. My days entailed practice, going to school, going back to practice, going home to eat dinner and work on homework while I iced my injuries, and then falling asleep exhausted. But of course, I woke up every day to do it all again in hopes to become the best that I could be and fulfill my dream of racing with the world's best. And eventually I got there. My sophomore year, I was having a breakout season until COVID put the world pretty much on hold, and the NCAA championships were canceled, which of course was a meet that I had worked my collegiate career and my whole life to get to. So this meant we all got sent home. Obviously all pools and such were shut down, so I put on a wetsuit and was swimming in the lake every day because this was my only option, and I was determined to keep after those dreams that I had set. In November of last year, near the middle of our collegiate season, it looked as if I was finally going to get a chance to compete at a national title. I was ranked 4th in the nation in the 200 freestyle behind some amazing names that I obviously was familiar with and one that I wasn't. And so this was the first time that I became aware of Leah Thomas. For all I knew, this was a swimmer from the University of Pennsylvania who had come out of nowhere senior year to post the fastest time in the nation by a large margin. It didn't make sense to me because obviously being at elite level, you know other elite swimmers, and so to see the name Leah Thomas, who was a senior, it just blew my mind. I wasn't sure who this person was. But it wasn't until an article came out on SwimSwam, I'm sure all the swimmers here are familiar with SwimSwam, that clarified that Leah was formerly Will Thomas, which was a male who swam for 3 years on the men's side at UPenn. I was shocked, but honestly, at this point, I didn't think too much of it in regards to still having my chance to win a national title, because I thought there's no way that the NCAA would allow Thomas to compete with the females. It honestly, truly didn't cross my mind that that would even be a possibility. But of course, I was proven very wrong. 3 weeks before the start of the meet, when the NCAA announced, or it was 3 weeks before the start of the meet when the NCAA announced Thomas would be competing with us. They were kind of back and forth for a while, and so there was a lot of uncertainty. But I got to personally witness and feel the effect this competition had on not only myself, but all the female athletes at that meet. I know it's impossible to speak for everyone on that pool deck, but I can attest to the number of tears shed by 9th and 17th place finishers who missed being an All-American, which is, I mean, an incredible honor, by one place. The extreme discomfort in the locker room, the talk of anger and frustration from the girls who had worked so hard and sacrificed so much to get to this moment. And another thing I just realized over the last couple of days at a dinner with Kim and Marshi in attendance as well, we were actually in D.C., and this was the day that the Biden administration rewrote Title IX, and obviously redefined sex to mean gender identity. But in regards to the locker room situation, it is now sexual assault to refer to a transgender swimmer by the pronouns they don't go by. But it is not sexual assault for Leah, who has different parts than everyone else at that meet, to be in our locker room. And so to me, that was just the most mind-blowing piece of information, but I thought I would share it because this new Title IX is about 700, 800 pages, so I'll spare you some reading. Not like I've done the reading, but that one little piece of it was enough for me to know that it's absolutely abysmal. I mean, that to me was just crazy. But anyways, who took into account our feelings? And who has taken any sort of accountability since? That answer is obviously no one. It's just a bit disheartening to know that our voice had no weight on an organization that we've done so much for, an organization that we've essentially dedicated our whole lives to. So on March 19th, Thomas and I raced and touched the wall at the exact same time, down to the 100th, which is pretty rare to do in swimming, as most of you know. And so, of course, the NCAA, they don't account for ties, and so they only had one fifth-place trophy, which I understand. But having only one fifth-place trophy, the NCAA handed it to Thomas and told me that mine would come in the mail. And so at this point, I'm still being understanding somewhat because I realized there's only one. But I was curious, and so I asked this NCAA official, I understand, but is there a reason why, you're adamant on Thomas holding the trophy? And he looked at me and said, well, we're just basing this off chronological order. And so at this point, I'm kind of taken aback because I'm confused what we're being chronological about. I'm like, okay, we just tied, and if we're doing this off the alphabet, G comes before T, but whatever. And so it was at this point that I really realized, what was happening. They told me that Thomas needed to hold the trophy for photo purposes. And so I'm completely taken aback here. So not only were we forced to race against a male, we were completely put on the back burner for men. Obviously, this was a difficult situation for the NCAA, and they clearly weren't prepared to handle it. But it's crucial for the NCAA to open their eyes and recognize, this irrefutable damage that's being done to women's sports and everything that Title IX stood for and was created for. There's no equity, fairness, sportsmanship, or opportunity for women to succeed at an elite level without sex-based categories. But it's not just the NCAA. It's other large organizations and governing bodies as well, like USA Swimming and like the IOC, and so many more organizations across all sports with the power to make and enforce these rules that are at fault for not protecting females. And until accountability is taken and rules are in place to protect these females, the integrity of women's sports is completely lost. Us women around the country are told to be silent. We're told to just let the conversation die down and comply so we don't step on any toes or ruffle any feathers. But we cannot continue to ignore these biological and anatomical differences between men and women that are blatantly obvious. If you're just looking at the pictures or watching the meet, I encourage any of you who haven't seen any of the races Thomas was in at NCAA's to go back and watch, because you can visibly see the amount of effort the females are putting in versus Thomas. it's very obvious, and you don't have to be a swimmer to see it. So I encourage everyone to go back and see that if you haven't. But if change isn't made, it's a slippery slope. It's only a beginning of, or a matter of time until one male national champion in a female sport turns into 3, and then into 10, and so on. Allowing these male athletes to switch teams when they feel necessary is not only an infringement on female athletes, but also a mockery of Title IX. I'm going to continue speaking out and standing up for myself. Others who are afraid to use their voice, past female athletes, like so many people in this room, who have worked so hard and fought so hard to get equal opportunities for women in sports, and for future female athletes who will lose athletic opportunities if all this madness continues. So I appreciate you guys listening.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Kim and Marshi, for setting this up in such a short amount of time and pulling me on board last minute. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Taylor Silverman. I have been skateboarding for 11 years. And for the past several years, I've competed at an amateur level in skateboarding contest. I'm here today to share my experience as a female athlete who has missed out on opportunities when competing with male athletes in women's divisions and faced being ignored by contest organizers when raising concerns about the undoubtable unfairness of this. So last December, I traveled to Lincoln, Nebraska to compete in the finals of a Red Bull event, Red Bull Cornerstone. I was invited after winning a qualifier in November in my home state of Michigan. In Lincoln, I participated in one more qualifier the day before the finals and placed first again. And for each qualifier, I received $500, $1,000 in total. And at this point, I was completely unaware that a male competitor had also participated in, placed first, and collected $1,000 in prize money at 2 other qualifiers in different states. So the day of the finals, I was pretty surprised when I saw who I'd be competing against. And the male competitor, unsurprisingly, took first place, receiving $3,000 along with $1,000 for women's best trick. With $1,000 from qualifiers, this totaled to $5,000 of the prize money that was meant for the female athletes. I came in second place, receiving $1,750, and then I got $1,000 in qualifiers, so I made out pretty good with $2,750, but I knew that I should have been in first place had this been an exclusively female division. Third place was paid $750, $1,000 less than she would have received if she was in second place. Someone was bumped off podium completely, and the competitor who I think would have won the $1,000 for best trick got nothing. Though I had heard of this happening in other sports, and this was actually the 3rd time this has happened to me, that was the 2nd time that I placed second, it was still pretty shocking. And during the event, I was too uncomfortable to speak up. The first times that it happened, and each time I heard about it happening in other sports, I assumed that everyone would understand how clearly unfair it was and it would discontinue eventually. But here we are today. So after Red Bull Cornerstone, I started to feel pretty guilty that I hadn't said something, spoken up, and I had fear that I would potentially have to explain this to my own daughters one day if I'm lucky enough to have a family of my own. And that became, excuse me, I haven't had that much coffee yet this morning, but that became to outweigh the fear of any potential negative consequences I might face for telling the truth. So I reached out to Red Bull by email to explain what happened and let them know I was concerned about this being unfair, and I wanted to see if we could talk. Maybe there was a better way to go about this. But my email was completely ignored. So I posted what happened on social media, and it went viral within an hour. Luckily, a lot of the right people saw it, it was shared, and I was able to share my story on a lot of media platforms and be involved in the rally last week and be here today. And I received tens of thousands of supportive messages from athletes, parents, and even a lot of people in the LGBTQ community who wanted me to know that they agreed that this was unfair and they didn't want me to think that this was an accurate representation of their community. But I also received many unsupportive messages, everything from name-calling to death threats. And because I'm Jewish, I've been targeted with a massive amount of anti-Semitism online, which is really unfortunate. And just Saturday, it's Monday today, so just last weekend, this occurred again. And I want you guys to know this is not unique in skateboarding. This is fairly common in skateboarding. Like I said, this was the third time this happened to me, and I know a lot of women who have been in contests with males in skateboarding. So last weekend, there was a Border event. Border is a pretty big organizer for skateboarding contests in America and other countries. And a male entered. This was in New York City, the Border Open presented by DC. Male entered the women's division, 29-year-old male, took first place to mostly teenage girls, and even one competitor who's 10 years old. And these girls are phenoms. These girls are incredibly talented, and to see this happen to young girls is very tragic. Skateboarding's kind of weird that it's not that uncommon to see teenagers competing with adults or even kids sometimes thrown in those divisions, but I know how painful this is to go through. As an adult, I can't imagine how it would feel as a 13-year-old. But yeah, the person who won that contest is currently trying to get into the Olympics, and the only reason that they weren't allowed in last time was because hormone levels. That's the only reason. And they're currently participating in an online Red Bull contest in the women's division as well. So many companies in skateboarding are actually supportive of this, and they do not listen to women when we speak up about it. But I believe that raising awareness is the first step to creating change, and that my story and the stories of all the other athletes who are speaking up about this in their sports need to be heard. So thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to share my story today. I believe that we need to keep women's sports female so we can keep women's sports fair.
I don't know how I'm going to do this. Very powerful testimonies. So my name is Kim Jones. I am co-founding Icons here with Marshi Smith. I'm a former Division I All-American tennis player from Stanford University. Had some amazing experiences over the course of my career, including representing the United States at the World University Games. And now I have 4 children, all of whom participate in competitive sport, and one of whom competed against Leah last year in the Ivy League Swim Championships and during the season. So here's my story. A female champion, a female athlete, is a symbol of power, an inspiration, and a source of strength for 51% of the world. Alongside a female leader in business or politics, a female athlete is a chance for women to see their potential, to know they are worthy of reward and recognition. To participate in women's sports is to participate in the empowerment of women until those in charge silence women and strip away the very principles that allow sport to be empowering. This last year, I saw firsthand the damage that occurs when we blur the definition of woman as I watched my daughter and other female collegiate swimmers face Leah Thomas, the first male swimmer in women's NCAA swimming. I saw previously empowered young women fade in strength and confidence. I watched in dismay as these young women were gaslighted, shamed, and told to seek counseling because they tried to point out discrimination. I saw tears, frustration, silence, lost records, and lost opportunities. I saw shocked young women question whether they had a right to undress out of the sight of male eyes and male nudity. Can I have a glass of water? Okay. I heard the stories of usually excited chatter in locker rooms and celebratory conversation going eerily silent. I watched mothers in stands crumple over in tears. And I know of fathers who could not bear to watch. What I witnessed was nothing short of emotional blackmail and abuse. The publicity around Leah Thomas forced responses and provided an opportunity for people to display leadership and to defend the fair treatment of women. Instead, what we witnessed was the casual manner in which women can be tossed aside and silenced. Fair treatment, an easy trade for power. Robin Harris of the Ivy League and Mark Emmert of the NCAA delivered blow after blow to women all year. I know the stories. I have the documents. I was there for much of this. The mandatory meetings asking the young women to be silent and to clear their words with department leadership, handouts telling the Ivy League swimmers to let the men in charge determine their fate and accept it without complaint. Messages and emails to seek counseling if a young woman doesn't want to undress in front of a man. Announcements at every dual meet, threatening compliance, or being labeled hateful if you believe women should not have to compare their physical bodies next to those of males. Is this what we send our daughters to college for? To learn subjugation and silence in the face of discrimination from those who were explicitly set up to protect them and encourage them to find their value in society and their passion in life. This is not the world I want for my daughter. It is not the world I'm willing to leave behind for my granddaughters. This is not the world that women and girls deserve. Over this last year, I have become aware of how prevalent these rules are that view women as less than worthy of our male counterparts. And I now know how little the leaders in the NCAA and the Ivy League think of women. I know we cannot depend upon legislation like Title IX alone to protect us. And I know from personal conversations that the ACLU, the National Women's Law Center, and the Women's Sports Foundation no longer defend women. On the other hand, it has been incredibly strengthening to learn of the vast and overwhelming majority of people who do believe that women deserve respect and fair opportunity. I have met so many brave women over the course of these last few months who are speaking up, and organizations who absolutely do recognize the value of women to society. Until now, women did not have a collective voice in sports to promote and protect female athletes, to defend them in difficult situations, and to provide access to opportunities beyond the sports field. Women need this collective voice to be in control of their own destiny and to have our hand in writing the rules that govern our sports. I am proud of the women that came before me to open up opportunities that I was able to take advantage of. And I know that the young women to come need to be able to fulfill the promise of Title IX and the potential still waiting for us in women's sports. It is in this vein that I have connected with Marshi Smith to found a new organization that will deliver on these promises. Alongside so many Olympians, world champions, leaders in sport, and young women made of steel that are sharing their voices, experts in law and science, we are excited to announce ICONS, the Independent Council on Women's Sport. Thank you.
Wow, I'm not sure how I am supposed to follow that. I am going to go off script a little bit, so say a prayer for me out there. But I was outside of the Georgia Tech complex when Leah Thomas won a national championship. And I stood out there and had all of these parents come up to me and hug me and thank me. It's one thing to be a female athlete in this, but it's another thing to be a parent of a female athlete in this. Sitting in the stands knowing that your child is in a locker room changing with a man, that is something I never want to have to face as I hope to be a mother one day. So I am proud of these women who are speaking up and giving female athletes a voice in this, because we are the ones that this is affecting, and our voice matters and their voice matters. So can we just give it up one more time for these amazing women? Okay, back on script. My name is Macy Petty. I am a current NCAA volleyball player on scholarship. And I am here today to speak on behalf of female athletes who, for the first time in 50 years, are worried about exclusion from something as fundamental as sports because of their sex. It should never be an issue that a woman has to face, yet it is permeating every aspect of our culture. Feelings have elevated far beyond science and reason, and women are forced into situations that are unfair and unsafe. As a woman, the opportunity for me to play my sport against my peers is a privilege that many who came before me were not given. This opportunity began 50 years ago. Title IX was signed by President Richard Nixon, giving women the right to have our own spaces, our own avenues, and our own paths to fairness and equality in athletics. Title IX has allowed many exceptional women to succeed athletically, grow personally, and has made a path for female athletes like me. But today, this is all being threatened. Instead of marking a monumental anniversary of Title IX by celebrating female athletes, the members of the media, the NCAA, and the Biden administration are striving to erase our sports, progress, and opportunities by allowing biological males to compete against women like me. Biological males are now invading spaces that were specifically designed to give young women a league of their own. This pushes female athletes like me to the sidelines. While this may have once seemed like a far-fetched idea, athlete Leah Thomas, born William Thomas, was at one point ranked 554 in men's swimming. Suddenly, the swimmer is winning medals and breaking records, swimming against women ranking number 1. The difference between women's sports extends much farther than just swimming. In my sport, volleyball, the standard men's net is 7 inches higher than a female's net. These 7 inches are there for a reason. Men are born naturally more athletic, and their sports reflect this. The difference in height between nets is not due to sexuality, identity, or anything other than biological facts. If you are born male, you have the genetic advantage that comes with being male. These advantages do not change with personality. These advantages do not change with identity. These advantages are carried with you onto the opposite playing field and used against women who are fighting for a chance to play. Many exploit this very advantage. In high school, I was forced to play my sport against a male athlete who chose to play on a women's net. This athlete had a 7-inch advantage by net height alone. While being examined by college recruiters, we had the ball slammed in our faces. This was at a national club tournament where boys' teams played just across the convention center. This is not equal justice for women. Sports were separated for a reason. I'm now going to do something that all the other current NCAA athletes are told they dare not do. To the NCAA. Where do your loyalties truly lie? There was a time when I thought you had my best interest at heart. I thought your priority was student athletes. I thought you wanted us to succeed. Was I naive to think that you actually cared? Will you allow men to take opportunities away from young women? Will you strip us of our playing time, platforms, and chance at education? Your silence speaks volumes. It shows that you do not care about empowering women, but rather about pushing an agenda that displaces women from opportunities that they have sought after their whole lives merely because of sex. You should promote fair competition and defend your female athletes. Why aren't you? To the Biden administration, do better. You claim to follow science and truth, and yet you have totally abandoned both of these principles, forsaken women in the process. In your efforts to be progressive, you have actually been sending us backwards, erasing equality. After all, though, it is easy for you to hold this outlandish position. You are not the ones practicing and playing for hours every day. You didn't work your whole life for a scholarship that you are now wondering if you will receive because you are competing against a man. You didn't see your teammate crying for missing out on a chance to play because a man took her spot. You aren't a young woman who is worried about your safety when changing in a locker room. You weren't standing outside of the Georgia Tech complex after Leah Thomas won a national championship and female athlete after female athlete walked out with tears in her eyes because she was a victim of your ideology. President Biden, all eyes are on you. You have been elected to lead. Men invading and taking over women's sports is the greatest threat to women's sports that exists. Do not turn a blind eye to this problem. Do not allow our pleas to fall on deaf ears. We have dreams and we have goals. We want the opportunity to pursue athletic excellence and academic achievement, and sports is the avenue to do this. Do not stand idly by as this avenue is stolen from us. Since the founding of our country, women have been fighting for equal opportunities in the workplace, town square, schools, voting booths, and playing fields. Women have rallied together to take back the opportunity that men have stolen from them for centuries. You have taken the country back 50 years and once again thrown women in the back seat. From Nixon to Trump, Title IX has opened the doors of athletic opportunity for women under their leadership. Under you, President Biden, women's sports are once again being taken by men. To the other female athletes, the women who came before us fought endlessly for our privilege to play against other females. Let's not have a future where our daughters go to their tryouts competing for a spot on a team against biological men. Is that the future that we want for our girls? It's our turn to fight for the next generation of girls. We are the Title IX fighters of our generation. So speak up and make your voices heard. Thank you.
That was great. It's so empowering. I feel honored to sit up here and hear these stories. My name is Sarah Powers Barnhard, and I am a past volleyball player too. I played Division I volleyball. I played in the USA system and professionally. I'm one of the first volleyball player to be inducted in the Mid-American Conference Hall of Fame. So that was quite an honor, quite an honor. I've been thinking a lot about this since I've talked with Kim and she invited me to come here to speak. like, what happened? When did volleyball, or when did sports become important to me? And I distinctly remember when I was 10 years old, and I'm in the car, and my brother just found out he received a full scholarship to play football in college. So I'm 10, I didn't know what that meant. My dad explained he's gonna go to school and everything's paid for, his education. Well, I decided right then and there that I was gonna get a full scholarship in sports too. And I literally told my dad, I said, Daddy, don't worry, by the time I go to college, they will have full scholarships for girls in football. And you know what? He never wavered. He said, that's great. You know, I love that about him. So played all the sports when I was young, loved sports, and fell in love with volleyball and decided that was going to be my sport. And got the scholarship and played at the highest level. So Title IX was about 3 years old at that time. I'm aging myself, so y'all can do the math. That, for me, rung huge, because that meant, you know, now when I look back, there was, like, my sisters were 10 years older. My sister was very good in softball. She didn't have the benefit of Title IX. So all those women who fought for Title IX for me, that was huge. They were there for me to be able to attain my goals in the sport that I loved. I had huge aspirations in my sport, and unfortunately, a situation evolved for me as a young girl that I don't wish for any athlete. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse by my youth volleyball coach. He was arguably the best youth volleyball coach in the country at the time. So it was not an easy feat to come forward. It was not an easy feat to fight him, and I will tell you, we started the fight 27 years ago. We did get him banned from USA Volleyball, and they let him back in after 5 years. And they never told us. We were many of the victims. There's 7 of us, but 3 came forward. We were busy having families. A lot of times you don't stay in the arena that you're abused in. I did come back to it. But that was a travesty we didn't even know. So starting in 2015, we valiantly started the fight again. And I'm going to point out Nancy Hogshead-Makar, champion women. Nancy was a godsend to me, working so closely with me and the other victims to fight our abuser again. She did petitions for us, wrote letters. It was just ongoing. And I'm going to give you a little side note. We are being sued, and I am now not a part of it anymore, but I was, for $250 million by my abuser. $250 million. Yeah, so it is something we're fighting, and we're going to keep fighting. So, you know, that's unfortunate. What's happened in all these years is, you're all so brave. This was a different kind of bravery for me, fighting for present and future athletes to be safe in their arenas. That was so important to me. You know, like every time I wanted to lay my head down, 8 years of therapy, by the way, very big advocate of therapy. When I wanted to lay my head down and be done with it, because it is all consuming, I kept thinking, what if there's one more little girl out there that needs to hear me? That's because I didn't have a voice back then. I didn't know who to tell. He groomed my family, he groomed everybody. So I can't lay my head down. There's a little girl who might contact me, or there's some volleyball coach just going to see me out there fighting, going, I'm not going to do that. So, you know, we're not going to end it, but we're going to limit it. So fighting abuse was huge. When I learned about ICON, Independent Council on Women's Sports, and what's going on with the transgender athletes, I thought, this is abuse. This is also abuse. So fighting for abuse, keeping girls safe, is also, you have to broaden that and say, well, what else is happening? We must keep sports for female athletes a positive environment, chances for them to have goals and dreams and achieve in the sport they choose. I run a volleyball club in Jacksonville, Florida. I have about 160 girls in my club. I see their joy. I see their love. I see their goals. I see it every day. And it kills me when I think that we're being railroaded into accepting males in our competition. This is abuse to female athletes, the little girls that I work so hard with. They have a right to set goals and not have something that's out of their control blocking the path to their success. That's not acceptable. I'm all for everyone's right to feel comfortable presenting themselves however they feel comfortable. I'm also all for sports, for anyone to compete in the sport that they love. But I am against naturally born males competing with or against naturally born females. That's it, period. This past week, I was in Orlando, Florida at AAU Nationals. I don't know if you've been there. It's quite a sight. Yeah, right? Many times, probably. This year, 4,500 female teams competing to win national championships. I mean, it's amazing. I was there 12 days. It is inspiring. It's so great to see these wonderful athletes competing in the sport I love. Many of the moms and dads, when they knew I was coming to speak here, came up to me and thanked me for fighting for their daughters. I mean, that's so touching. I've heard it before because I told you I was fighting in a different arena. And it empowered me to say, that's right. You know what? We have to band together to continue this fight. Abuse is abuse. My abuse wasn't a great thing. I feel it doesn't define me, but it empowered me to help others. This is something that we all have to do to empower people that need to make the change and look at us females and say, you have the right. For the past 50 years, we're not going to alter this. We're not taking an end around or veering off. Female athletes deserve the right to achieve in the sport that they choose with other female athletes. My 10-year-old self had opportunities. I had dreams that were possible because, as I said, the women who fought for Title IX. You know, there were so many amazing athletes before me that I owe it to all the young female athletes to protect their right to work hard, play hard, dream big in whatever sport they choose. So I'm standing up with Icon and whatever I need to do to help support.
Hi everyone, my name's Ross Tucker. I am distinctly the odd one out on stage for a handful of reasons, one of which will be obvious to you, because unlike the people who you are trying to reach, you do understand the difference between males and females. The second is that I'm not an Olympic athlete. I've never held a scholarship. I've never even won a major title. I studied sports science because I wasn't athletic enough. So the only way I got into doing sport was to study the athletes like they're standing on stage. And so I did a PhD in physiology. I worked for what was probably about a decade at the University of Cape Town back in South Africa. And I now work for World Rugby, which is the governing body that runs the sport of rugby union around the world as a consultant. My main job is to study concussion, but I also support them in any decisions they make that need scientific evidence. And I'll tell you shortly about that. I'm not really sure where this goes, but I do have a confession to make, so I'm sort of working towards that. I was struck last week. I was watching the World Swimming Championships in Budapest. You may have watched those. I know many of you are very much involved in the sport. The women's 800 was won for the how manyth time by Katie Ledecky. The men's 800 was won by Bobby Fink. Bobby Fink swam 3.7 seconds per 100 faster than Katie Ledecky to win that title. In the previous generation, you had Ryan Lochte and you had Missy Franklin, both of whom held world records in the 200 backstroke. Nancy has shown a slide that shows that they were the same height and they had the same arm span. Yet Ryan Lochte was 10% faster than Missy Franklin. Now, the physiologist in me, the scientist who brings data to this conversation, recognizes this difference and says, well, I've got two ways to interpret that. I could say that Katie Ledecky and Missy Franklin are inferior athletes compared to Bobby Fink and Ryan Lochte. Now, you could do that. If that's your opinion, I suggest you're in the wrong conversation, and you're welcome to go and watch half of all the world's athletes compete and enjoy yourself and not make comments about sport. The second way you can interpret that is to recognize that those two athletes are equally exceptional, that they are equally meritorious, they are equally deserving of gold medals and the recognition they get, the sponsorship they get, the earnings they make. The only way you can arrive at that second position is if you respect biology. If you deny biology, you can land on the first option. If you respect biology, you can't. Because then you understand why we have women's sports in the first place. The category of women's sport is the only thing that allows us to elevate 50% of humans, to give them the opportunity to be Katie Ledecky or Serena Williams or Naomi Osaka or whoever, pick your athlete. And so when I got involved in this debate, which was probably about a decade ago, I brought to it scientific interpretation understanding. That was, you know the concept of Maslow's hammer is when the only tool in your toolbox is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. I came to this with data and science. And I'll be honest with you, 10 years ago, before I'd ever waded in or even taken my first step into this debate, I remember being asked in passing what I thought of it. And I said, well, as far as I know, taking the testosterone away takes the advantage away, so there's no problem. You see, and I was ignorant. And I was ignorant as a consequence of my apathy, because I'd never been asked to take the next step into it. And so I only had a superficial understanding, and I made a comment that was wrong, which I regret, because I should have said, hang on a moment, let me look into that in more detail and get back to you. I made the same mistake that sports authorities have been making for 20 years. And that's the confession. And so the only thing that changed that is that I was lucky enough that it's, and I don't even remember when it was, but some people started to say, hang on a moment, have you thought about X and Y and Z? And so, okay, let's have a look at this and let's see where it goes. And then what happened was my country produced arguably one of the most controversial athletes we've seen in Caster Semenya. And I ended up testifying in Lausanne in what was quite a convoluted way on both sides of the issue. And it was only really at that point that I started to properly explore the biology and science. Now, when I sit in this audience and I listen to these people talking today, I think, and I know this is not entirely the case, my impression is that the biological debate has largely been won. 5 years ago, there was a legitimate argument where people were denying the male advantage even when the testosterone levels were lowered. Where we are today, only people arguing in bad faith are still denying that reality. So we've got, nobody disagrees that male advantage is large, and that's why we have women's, well, there are some people who disagree. I mean, you know, there's always someone. You can think of names. Where sport went to try and fix, quote unquote, the issue was to take the testosterone levels down, the thinking being that if we could treat at source the source of the male advantage, we could remove it. So really the only question you have to answer is, does it work? And we know the answer is no. So I think that sport has gotten to the point now where most people who are in good faith and honest with themselves will recognize that. And so my role as a biologist has well, it's never going to be an end, but I do feel sometimes that it's coming to an end. It was in 2003 that the first group of men got together to discuss trans issues and guidelines in sport for the IOC. Did anyone know that happened? I didn't know it happened. I was in the field. Because it happened in the darkness. And it stayed in the darkness for a decade. And then in 2015 it was discussed. And still, there were no cases that made people aware of exactly what was happening out of the light. And the way that I see it now is that the science and the work that's been done, for instance, Emma Hilton is standing to the back right of the room as you're sitting facing me. Carol was working at the bar earlier on. You've got all these scientists who've now, Tommy Lundberg in his absence from Sweden, wrote a paper with Emma, which really did blow up this myth that lowering the testosterone would remove the male advantage. So we've made significant progress. And in a sense, what the science has done is shine a light on what happened in the darkness. What I see sitting in this chair today is that now there is sound and light. Because there was a point 3 or 4 years ago, in fact, I dare say 2 years ago, that this meeting wouldn't have happened. There were no people like Kim and Marshi who had recognized what's happening and decided that it was about time that women found a voice and used it. There was only a group of small people talking in relatively confined academic circles about these issues. That's now become well known, and the next steps that need to be taken are for the accuracy of that debate provided by the science to be propagated by the likes of yourselves. You need to add the voice to the light. And so when I come up here, I feel like honestly, I feel like a little bit like I let the air out of the room, because the passion with which these speakers tell their own personal stories is so powerful. And that's what I hope that this meeting over the next day and a half, as it concludes, gives you, is, in a sense, safety in numbers. It's frightening being the first to go out and do something. It's the knowledge that we'll give you. I mean, we're talking later on about the science, so we will give you all the tools possible, more than just hammers. And I hope that it's the sense that you have solidarity. You have science on your side, you've got a community on your side, and you have a necessary and rational reason to hold the position that you have. And so you don't need a rallying cry. I mean, the passion and emotion with which people, you've got enough. But if we can contribute to that through the science, then I hope that that's the one thing that maybe pushes people over the line. And just very quickly, in 2019, as it was becoming increasingly obvious, World Rugby decided that it was time for us to review our policies. And so in 2020, we held a meeting in London, and we had both sides of the argument there. We recognized that there were legal, scientific, medical, ethical, and social concerns. And we invited speakers and delegates and experts on both sides of the divide in those respective domains to come and present to us. And what we held effectively was a court case that was, we had a committee that consisted of the head of Women's World Rugby, a medical chair, our chief medical officer, chief legal advisor, some players, and so on. I was on that. And over the course of 2 days, we evaluated all these arguments. And I cannot emphasize enough the difference in quality between the arguments that you are making and the arguments made on the other side is enormous. It is enormous. And if we can just get that message out more and more and more and more, that will eventually, I know that it's difficult sometimes when you see changes made, like has been made to your Title IX. Over the weekend, German football decided that simply identifying is sufficient. And it feels like there's steps back all the time. But then you see FINA and you say, okay, we've taken a step forward. And if we just keep working and pulling and using the light that is provided by science and the voice that is provided by yourselves, the sound and the fury, there will be progress. World Rugby, by the end of that meeting, recognized that there was only one right thing to do. And that was to issue a statement and a policy that said the transgender woman cannot play elite women's rugby. Because we recognized that safety... We recognized that safety and fairness were priorities. Sport has historically tried to juggle and balance three different things. And what we're saying is it's not possible. So you must pick. And if you pick against safety and fairness, and you pick for inclusion, well, at least now we know where you stand. It's in the light. But our position was that you just couldn't blur the lines that were necessarily drawn around a category for women in sport. And my hope is that this organization, Icons, carries that message and that you're able to have an effect with the decision makers. This is where I am naive. I can't see how they can ignore you. I cannot see how they can ignore you. And so therefore all you have to do is continue to speak. That's it. Shout as loudly as you can. Good luck.
So at this point, we're just going to ask if you have any questions for the ladies sitting up here, and Ross, too, be on standby. Does anyone have a question? And we'll get a mic to you. Make sure you're talking into the mic.
Hi, I'm Fiona from Fair Play for Women in the UK. I'd like to ask the athletes what response you've had from teammates for daring to speak out, and whether you're starting to see any others finding their voice and their courage.
So I can't commend my university enough. If anyone here knows anyone who's about to go to college, I highly recommend Kentucky, because I have had so much support from my coaches and my athletic department, my athletic director, so all the way from the tip top, which is what I've discovered to be an extreme minority, and obviously something I completely took for granted while I was at school. But talking to other swimmers at NCAAs, like Kim said, they're told they're not allowed to speak out. They have to go to training. They have to get everything they say approved through someone, which is just mind-blowing. It's an infringement on freedom of speech as well at this point. And so I've definitely realized I'm a minority in this situation, but I'm extremely fortunate. And after talking to people, like you mentioned, my teammates, other swimmers, other athletes in general, this is definitely the majority. People are just scared and intimidated.
I would second that. My school, I try not to pull them into it with the name, but they have also been very supportive of me. I would say that as far as my teammates go, a lot of them, we could not disagree more as far as politics go, but this is the one issue that we agree on. They buy into the whole idea of the transgender ideology, and this is the one issue that goes just a step too far for them, because they're a female athlete, and they don't want to play against a biological male. So this is the one that kind of hits home for them. And as an NCAA athlete, I know that what I'm doing is risky, and a lot of other people won't do it because they're afraid of losing their scholarship. I'm afraid of losing my scholarship, but I'm also afraid of my daughter that I hope to have one day, and her losing even the opportunity to try out for a sport, because she's going to have to do it against biological men. So this is something that I am willing to do, and I know that there are other female athletes out there who are taking a chance, because this is something that they know is really important, and there are female athletes' voices that need to be heard, despite all of the fear tactics being used and the silencing that's going on. So to my other female athletes out there who are scared, just do it. You know, it's at least for me, it's worth it to think about my daughter that I hope to have one day, and I'm not going to be that mom that's going to force her to play sports, but I want her to at least have the opportunity to try out. So.
Check. Okay. So in skateboarding, I don't play on a team. It's a pretty individual thing, but I've received a lot of support from the skateboarding community. And I've also received some backlash from people who think that skateboarding should be as inclusive as possible, as long as the only people who are being oppressed and erased by it are women. But it's really unfortunate, and I have serious concerns for the future of women skateboarding, because skateboarding is not something that's necessarily ever been protected by Title IX. And when I first started skateboarding, there were hardly any women's divisions at all, so it was very exciting when we started to get those, but within a few years, this happened. So yeah, I've received a lot of people's messages that are anonymous, like they don't speak publicly about it, but they're messaging me in my inbox or texting me, pros, Olympians, people in my community, people all over the world who have heard about this in other countries. And I think that the majority of people support it, but unfortunately, the culture of skateboarding is still extremely misogynistic. It's very male-dominated, and there's a lot of men who think women shouldn't be skateboarding at all, and think that what's happening to us is hilarious. But skateboarding for girls is a very fast-growing thing. We see more and more little girls at the park, more and more women interested in board sports in general. So I think that it's only a matter of time before more people use their voices, because a lot of people have common sense and recognize that this is unfair.
have a, I'm gonna turn that one off. It's a little different for me. My teammates are older, but I'm in the arena so much with the athletes and the parents. And there's so much outrage and support that I feel, like I just told you, I was in Orlando with 4,500 teams. So many people knowing the battle that I've fought on different levels are so supportive. Speaking of the fear, I mean, you can imagine the fear when I first had to come forward for the abuse. And I'll tell you what, when you're telling the truth and you know something is right and you're so impassioned, you don't care of the naysayers. Because believe me, I had a lot of naysayers. I was attacked on social media and I didn't care, because what happens is you know the truth and you know the battle and you know what you're standing up for. So we did get that coach banned again in 2018, and it took a battle and it took bravery, not just myself, the other victims. So I'm so proud to hear you all say what you're saying, because I don't care the battle. This is a battle worth fighting, and we're doing the right thing, so there's no stopping it. You don't get bullied to stay quiet. You have to fight for what's right, always.
I'm going to add on one more thing while we're on this topic, because the importance of community is something that I cannot stress enough. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Young Women for America. Doreen Denny's out there from Concerned Women for America. They've been a great community for me and actually empowered me to testify at state legislatures for these Save Women's Sports bills. Icons is a great one. Just being around other female athletes, because there is so much hate out there and just horrible things being thrown at you. So being able to be involved in a community with other female athletes who are in a similar position as you is something that's really important. So
I was interested in the psychology of Leah Thomas winning. Did she think that's the greatest thing, or he, she, whatever you want to call it? I'll give you an analogy. I'm a 66-year-old who plays golf. If you put me in a tournament against a male who's 90 years old, I'm going to kick his ass, okay? There's no doubt about it. And I would not feel good going home with a plastic medal or a trophy or an NCAA trophy. What brings that athlete in your mind psychologically to be happy about their win that's tainted and was cheated? How do you go home with a trophy like that?
So I think that instead of us responding to how Leah feels, we should let Leah's words speak for Leah. And Leah has given a lot of interviews on this. So at this point, I think I appreciate your question. I know where you're coming from. I know a lot of us wrestle, with how does an athlete perceive their competition, or how are they self-reflective. But I don't think it's our position to speculate for Leah. So I appreciate your question. Leah has given. I think the effect of Leah competing, we've all spoken. It's been, hard for us. But I think to watch, and I'm going to answer your question in a roundabout way and say, not speaking on behalf of Leah, but speaking on behalf of women. One thing I've noticed as this has unfolded, and I've said it before, when women have to watch another woman being abused, mistreated, or disregarded or silenced, it affects all of us collectively. So we see when young girls watch that on television, when parents watch that for their daughters, when women who have been part of, as you said, the sports community, regardless of your political affiliation, your personal identity, your sexuality, your politics, whatever they are, when any of us who have a passion for sports, which bridges so many of our differences across life, cultures, and even the world, when we watch how women are mistreated and we absorb that as how we're supposed to allow ourselves to be treated, it's extremely painful. I can't speak for Leah. All I can speak for is how we feel when we are told by the people who are in power that we don't have a voice.
We're often told that we shouldn't be worried about this because there are so few trans women competing in women's sports. But more and more, there seems to be a trans woman in almost every sport competing and winning. I was wondering, does anybody know of a comprehensive survey of how many trans women are competing and winning in each sport in the United States and beyond? And also, what was the entity that made the decision that that particular trans woman was allowed to participate, so that we can contact them, we can, reach out, write letters? How do we start to connect those two things and, connect the people with the people that are making the decisions?
For the first part of the question, I don't know if there's any resource available right now that says where this is happening right now, every instance, because a lot of these are unreported and women are suffering in silence and scared to speak up. But there is a really interesting website, shewon.org, that has a decent list of some of the reported cases and lists the names, the years, the sport and contest that it was, and what placement the woman would have taken but was bumped out of. And it is very sad to look at, because there's a lot of women who lost their opportunity to compete in the Olympics. And I was added to that list recently, but you should definitely check out shewon.org. And if you know of any cases that aren't on there right now, you can submit them. As for contacting organizers to make a difference, we're all trying to do that, and they aren't listening. So I think we just need to be louder and make sure the whole world knows.
Sorry. So globally, the body that sets the rule is the International Olympic Committee, and I alluded earlier to a consensus document that was originally written in 2003. That was revised in 2015, and then last year, 21, they brought out their latest policy non-guideline. A couple of important things are that the policy's evolved over time so that it has become progressively more and more permissive. In other words, the barriers to entry for trans women into women's sport have been progressively lowered, to the extent that the latest International Olympic Committee document, and I'm not sure how many are aware of this, actually instructs sports that there should be no presumption of advantage, which is outrageous. They've actually said that sports have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis or develop their own guidelines without assuming that there's a male advantage before saying that the person can or can't compete. So when you're an international sports body, that's the instruction coming down from on high. And how that happened, I don't know. I've sat in meetings with a lot of the people in this, and they're not foolish people. Earlier this year, in about March, April, the very same International Olympic Committee brought out a document called Women's Issues in Sport. So they do know the difference. It's like they can't write a document talking about unique challenges women face in sport and then hold this bizarre transgender position at the same time. But the one thing is, and I should have mentioned it earlier, is they have a significant head start. For 20 years, the lobby has been working, as I mentioned, in the dark to try and dictate what is allowed and what is not allowed, and to try and make inclusion of trans women the norm. And so we really are playing catch-up. So that's the main problem. And then to your second point, as far as surveys go, when we did the World Rugby document, we tried to survey our member unions, and they had no idea because they never needed to. Because it was allowed to happen, and at the community level, so many people just wouldn't declare. They wouldn't say. They'll just say, I'm playing on the women's team. And there was no reporting mechanism. There was no need to regulate. It was allowable, so therefore, why monitor? It was like asking them how many people play rugby with brown hair. You might as well ask them that. They never bothered to look because it wasn't required. And so it's a big unknown. And then finally, sorry to waffle, the thing that I've been struck by most in the last 3 years is the rate at which it's happening. 3 years ago, I would not have imagined that there'd be this many so quickly. I figured it would take a couple of generations. It's happening so fast that 3 years ago, the most common rebuttal was, this is a non-problem. You're solving something that doesn't exist. Now, of course, every time you point out to one of the cases, they say, don't pick on individuals. So you actually How do we have this discussion? But that's where we are. We don't know. We're not allowed to regulate or measure it. And so, yeah, as I say, darkness.
I think it's also really important when looking at these numbers, like he said, to look at the nature of recruiting, because college coaches, their job is dependent on them being able to win. So if you know that you're going to have to play against a transgender athlete, then you're going to have to recruit someone who can beat a biological male, which is probably going to be another biological male. So this definitely has a snowball effect to it, because coaches have to respond in a way that they're going to be able to win.
That's such a good point. That's exactly how I feel, because the snowball effect is going to affect the little girls that I work with. Because if they're going to look up and see this thing in the news going, well, I'm not going to work hard, I'm not going to get there, that's not going to be something for me, and that's horrible.
Riley, I was going to ask you, obviously you indicated that your administration was really supportive of you. Are they supportive enough, and I'm not picking on Kentucky at all, but just for a broader perspective, are they supportive enough that your athletic director would have conversations with other athletic directors? Do you know if he's or she is willing to have those conversations to get more alignment, more support? And I know that it's not the athletic directors that make the decisions, but I'm hoping that if they're more on board, that they can influence the Board of Governors at the NCAA level.
No, I think so. As soon as this whole thing happened in March, my athletic director actually told me, I forget who, reached out to him and asked for a statement, and he gave a statement supportive of me, and they never released it, which is just, that tells you right there. But I do believe, obviously, they're in a tough position being so high up and having those responsibilities, but I do believe they would be supportive of me in anything I do. They have been all 4 years, which is something that now that I'm done, I can kind of look back and realize. But my coach, he's like my best friend. We talk on the phone like 10 times a day still. And so I know he would do anything for me, as well as my athletic director. I really do think so.
So actually, kind of to follow up on that, Riley, while we are 51, I think maybe 52% of the population women. I know in my days as an athlete, our biggest fans were from the men's crew. Obviously, we didn't have this issue happening. So I'd like to know from especially the current athletes what the conversation is on campus with your male counterparts on the male teams, if you're getting support from them, or if they're just silent also.
Yes, so I was lucky enough to marry one. I don't know if this is just being at a Southeastern Conference school, kind of being in the South. I know that's a whole different kind of population as a whole, but everyone, at least on my team, knows there's a problem with it. It's a very open conversation we have, and we have had. There are very, very few people who didn't apologize to me on behalf of men and the NCAA on my team, which is just mind-blowing to me that I have these guys on my team apologizing to me for something they didn't do. It's because they felt this sense of, you know, apology. Like they truly felt like they owed me condolences. And I'm like, okay, no one like died or anything, but it is something that even the men, Louis, you could take over this question if you want, but seriously, it is something the men see a problem with as well.
I'm going to add to that as well, since I have a son competing in the NCAA men's swimming. And I can tell you across the board, with rare exceptions, they are heartbroken for the female athletes that they absolutely do respect as peers.
I have a follow-up question for Riley as well. Do you plan to go on and to train for the Olympics coming up, the next Olympics?
So I actually am still swimming. but it's a lot less intense because I'm training for triathlons as of now. I actually just had my first one this past weekend and won, and it was super fun. Or I guess 2 weeks ago. And so I'm still swimming. What the future holds is unknown, but I'm really enjoying doing different things as of now.
I just wanted to add to the last question about men's perspective on this and our male peers. In skateboarding, I receive more support from men. And it's a lot of dads who are scared that this is going to happen to their kids. But men seem to be more comfortable being vocal about it, and women seem to be a little bit more scared. In fact, just last night, Nicole and I went out on the strip, and we were having some fun filming TikTok videos where we were stopping pedestrians and asking them, what do you think of males competing in women's sports? And they didn't know who we were. But people were responding saying, that should be illegal. Like, this is unfair, this isn't right. And the only people who, we had one group of young girls who were two 18-year-old girls, soccer players, and they just were like, I think it's okay, I think it's fair, I should just say whatever people want me to say. And then I asked them if they were athletes, and they said, yeah, we play soccer. And I said, well, how would you feel if maybe you were cut from your team because a male took your spot? They said, well, we would just talk to the coach about it. Oh, that's nice. And I said, well, what if the coach told you to shut up and not complain? Well, I'd be really, really angry. And I was like, well, maybe you should consider the perspective of the female athletes. But for men, they seem to be more vocal, more comfortable speaking up about it because I think they have a natural want to protect women. And women, I think, have internalized a lot of what's happening to us, and some of them just want to be inclusive and don't realize that they're really giving up their own rights.
Well, and we talked about the, having daughters, and I just want to say that there's a good chance you'll have a son. And that's where some of this needs to begin, is talking about fairness for, you know, the girls that you play with or the women who are in your life as you get older. So I think we need to make sure we include the men in this conversation.
I hear so many men say, like, I agree with you, but I don't, like, for lack of a better term, I don't have a dog in this fight. And I say, yes, you do. You know women in your life, you absolutely know women and girls in your life who love sports. Everybody should be speaking up about this.
Okay, we're going to take one more question, and then we have some more athletes.
I don't have a question. I have more color commentary that I want to add as a former athlete and then now as a parent of a girl swimmer. So I was very aware of my privilege in swimming. I was on the very first NC2A national championship team for swimming for Stanford when the women were allowed to swim NC2A. Prior to that, my former older teammates were having to swim under I think it was called AIAW. So I was very aware of my privilege for that. And then fast forward 35 years, I now have a daughter who competed at the NC2A National Swim Championships in March. I was there as a parent. My first observation when I showed up, I already knew about Leah Thomas. But if you didn't know, you would watch warm-ups like parents sitting and doing, and you'd say, why is there a guy down there? It was so clearly obvious, just observing. Then my daughter became afraid to change in the locker room because her teammates walked in and saw Leah Thomas naked and still has all his equipment. And so she started changing elsewhere. And I started getting mad. So I was aware, walking in and out of the pool, of the protesters showing up, and I started thinking, okay, I may get canceled, I may get some negative attention for this, but I'm going to start giving every single protester a hug. So we probably hugged. Then there was press outside, and I said, I'm going to start speaking up. So I gave a few interviews. Don't know, can't remember if they were published or even who they were, but that was my first tentative steps into that. And then I was standing next to one of the security guards who made a comment to me one time when I was waiting for my husband. I was just standing there. She said, I can't believe there's all these haters out there, which was the protesters. And I said,
let me give you my perspective on that. I swam against the East Germans when they were doping, which is a similar form of biological cheating. And she actually said to me, "Thank you so much for setting me straight. I was not aware of why these protesters were out here." So my final comment on that is I think there's a lot of people that are just ignorant and need information. So I just wanted to thank Marshi and Kim again and all you brave women up there because we are now starting to have a voice. So thank you.
Okay, we're going to take just a short break, 10 minutes if you need coffee or hit the bathroom. We're going to have a few more speakers just give their brief testimonies representing different sports.